Okay, we are picking up where we left off in the chapter on food. This is week 5, and this is a makeup lecture for the holiday we're having today. So I hope you're enjoying yourself. As I have told you many times so far, I like this textbook, but it lacks a lot of critical perspective. So we're going to talk about that today. Your response paper is about where food comes from. And I think maybe the best way to describe what we're trying to do is to talk about food consciousness. The first thing is, we in our day and age have the luxury and the privilege of having access to food on a level that is unprecedented in history. Throughout human history, since the beginning of time, we have had to deal with starvation that continues. There are, according to Google, there's at least 20 million people on the brink of starving from food, lack of food every day. There's a lot of donations, and there's a lot of food drives, there's a lot of organizations that are still working to eliminate starvation and poverty. However, that being said, the scale of starvation is minute considering what it was like 1,000 years ago. For example, when at any given time on anywhere on Earth, there would be a section of the population that was starving. China is a good example. During what was called the Great Leap Forward, about 60 years ago, Mao Zedong shifted the labor force of the Chinese to produce more steel and manufacturing, to increase the manufacturing, to demonstrate that China had developed and progressed. And the consequence of that was a lack of agricultural production, which resulted in tens of millions of people starving to death. A similar thing may be happening in North Korea right now, where the demand for munitions and weapons to supply Russia is causing a shift in production. People are producing certain amounts of weapons rather than producing food and developing their agriculture, and because of economic sanctions, they cannot import food to replace that, which may result in famine. That hasn't happened yet. This is all contemporary speculation when it comes to shifting labor to different focuses, and the result being a lack of agricultural production. Food security is another issue, big issue, which I think the textbook doesn't give you any context. The title, Bugs, Rats, and Other Tasty Dishes, really sort of neglects the whole idea of resorting to eating things that you normally wouldn't, simply because of the demand, the prospect of starvation and trying to survive. Bugs may I suggested bundegi, which some insects are tasty if they're cooked a certain way, and they have their own flavor. In the text, there's discussion of appetizers and exotic foods like snake soup and different courses, desserts, fish heads. Not to say that you can't turn something that normally you wouldn't eat into something that tastes good using different culinary techniques. It's just that when you say that people prefer termites, ants, or bees as delicacies to many people, you have to question, if they had the choice between eating king crab or steak or samgyeopsal or bees, which one would they choose? Maybe they've never sampled the types of food that we take for granted. One of those things that enables us to have this kind of food is, the technology, refrigeration, logistics, transportation by ship, transportation in refrigerated, containers, airplanes. We get every spring in Korea, the supermarkets are filled with blueberries and cherries, and they're all from the west coast of the United States. It's California, Oregon, Washington. Now I've seen they come from Chile in South America. These are things that this article, this passage about eating certain things, if it's a choice, that's one thing, and if it's a matter of survival or a danger of starvation, that's a different thing. So I'll give you a few examples. There is a taboo in certain cultures against eating certain types of food. Hindu people don't eat cows because they are considered sacred. We have to consider how that practice developed and why Indian people wouldn't be able to eat cows. Obviously, it's become a religious sort of element of their society, but in reality, let's consider the fact that if every Indian person, 1.4 billion people, wanted to eat beef once a week, the entire country would be destroyed. There would be cows grazing everywhere, eating everything. When the Europeans came to the New World and brought pigs and cows and chickens and animals that were not native to North America, the native people were growing beans and squash and corn, and the animals that the Europeans had trampled everything, ate everything, destroyed all of their farms because they didn't have any of that kind of livestock in France or in England, in Germany. There are fences everywhere. There are hedges that are hundreds of years old in order to prevent, animals from moving from one property to another. None of that stuff existed in North America until the Europeans came. So when they brought their animals with them and started raising them, that was one of the many issues that the native people had with European settlers, was that their animals were running. Many of them became wild. There was no horses in North America. Some of the horses got loose and they went out into the plains and they bred and they became wild horses, and then the native people domesticated them and became better, horsemen and archers and fighters on horseback than the Europeans were. It's a really sort of, we're talking about animals and the development sort of obliquely related to food, but all of these things have consequences. The Columbian Exchange in 1492 was the beginning, because Columbus arrived. Columbian Exchange was the single most serious event in human history in the last 1,000 years, simply because all of these animals, diseases, people started to be transferred back and forth between the Americas and Asia and Africa, and Europe, the so-called old world. So traditional foods go back hundreds of years, but there's actually a limit. Kimchi is a perfect example, actually, that there was kimchi going back thousands of years. There's evidence that Koreans were pickling and fermenting things going back to the Three Kingdoms period, and I think it's called the Samguk-yosa. I'm not saying that right, but there is evidence that the Koreans have been fermenting and making kimchi for hundreds of years before the Columbian Exchange happened. But the kimchi that we're all familiar with, the red spicy one, couldn't have existed until peppers, which are native to Mexico and the Americas, were introduced to Asia by the Portuguese after the 15th century. In the 16th, 17th century, that's when all of the famous food that coming from India and Thailand, using chilies, those chili peppers, they're all native. Potatoes is another big one. Corn, none of those things were, none of those seeds, none of those plants were around. So you have to, in some cases, you have to be adventurous. You have to, go outside your experience and try something else, and that's part of the fun of having something exotic, something that that's not familiar to you. Exotic can be a negative or a positive description of something, but generally we think that something exotic is something interesting that you've never experienced before, and it's a limited experience. So some of these descriptions of things, termites and ants and bees are very, very common. You could, if you wanted to, you could eat them at any point, and you could spice them or roast them or barbecue them or grill them or fry them or eat them raw. There was a famous show when I was in university about 20 years ago called Survivor Man, and he would go to different terrains and he would just eat something out of the forest or just survive, just have his camera on himself and try. It turned out that it was a bit of a setup, that there was actually ambulances and emergency crews nearby just in case things went wrong. But Survivor Man was very popular simply because he was eating things that he had to dig up, grubs, and he had to fish, using limited resources and things, sort of simulating what it might be like if you were a hunter-gatherer 10,000 years ago and you were on your own trying to keep yourself alive. That's a very limited, sort of exotic, risky experience. But it is related to the fact that he was able to do that and record it and put it on a TV show Now it would be streaming. He would be a YouTube influencer now. But at the time, it was a television show. This is related to the fact that he does have food security, and he does, have the option of quitting, the Amazon rainforest or the Arctic or the desert if things go badly. He's really not he's not really risking himself. So, Thomas Malthus, let me relate what's on the board to what I'm talking about. He actually predicted that, as we know, the population of the Earth has gone up to about 8 billion. And he said that the increase in food was going to be an arithmetic sort of increase. It's going to increase over time, and we can increase the amount of food production, but the amount of people that are being born is going to increase logarithmically, exponentially, so that at a certain point, the population of the Earth is going to be growing so fast that it's going to outpace the food production, and then we're going to have a crisis. In other words, there's going to be a catastrophe and a population that is the Earth is not going to be able to support. This is hundreds of years ago that he predicted this, and because of technology and because of innovation, fertilizers, machinery, seeds, GMO, we've found ways so far to increase the amount of food that we produce, which has kept pace so far, unlike his prediction. But there is a ceiling, and I think at a certain point, climate change is going to affect how much we're capable of producing, and there is a limit, like he predicted, to the amount of people that the Earth can handle. I don't know what that number is. We're at about 8 billion people now, but we're pushing at the limit right now. I think we're getting close to what he said was the concern. So that's called the Malthusian crisis, or the Malthusian catastrophe. I wrote food crisis over here. All these different varieties of plants and all these specialized seeds and fertilizer and machines that we have sort of delayed the inevitable. But I do think that he has a good point, that we have to be conscious of that. That being said, we have food culture is, there's an industry, there's a culture surrounding food. It's been like that throughout the history of human agriculture. We've been able to, some of us have been able to try exotic things that we normally wouldn't be able to try, and it's something that sort of represents your class or your status if you're able to do this sort of thing. There was a celebrity chef named Anthony Bourdain, who was American, obviously descended from a French, family with his name and his family name. I didn't follow him a lot, but in 2018, 6 years ago, he ended his life tragically for his own reasons. People are not sure exactly why, but he was 61 years old, and he was sort of a celebrity chef, travel, documentarian. He wrote a lot of interesting stuff, and his books are very popular, and a lot of people felt sad about his passing because he seemed to really enjoy this aspect of food culture. He sort of captured what some people think is the best aspect, of the food experience. This is a quote from him. This is my favorite quote by him. And I've done this myself. I'll read the quote first and then I'll reflect. He said, Anthony Bourdain said, "Eat at a local restaurant tonight. Get the cream sauce. Have a cold pint at 4 o'clock in a mostly empty bar. Go somewhere you've never been. Listen to someone you think you may have nothing in common with. Order the steak rare. Eat an oyster. Have a Negroni. Have two. Be open to a new world where you may not understand or agree with the person next to you, but have a drink with them anyways. Eat slowly. Tip your server. Check on your friends. Check on yourself. Enjoy the ride." So he really captures in that paragraph the essence of what food culture can do, the experience of sharing a drink or sharing food with somebody, even somebody that you have nothing in common with, can bring, people together. It is, though, I think, the fact he was not a poor person. He wasn't a person who looked at food as something to prevent death, but something that was an experience to share with other people. And that's a very ambitious statement to make, that at some point everybody in the world might be able to have that sort of experience. It's not something that's possible for 90% or above that. The majority of the people on Earth don't have the opportunity to have a drink with a stranger and tip their server, generously. That's something that you shouldn't take for granted, something that you should enjoy, but something that you should reflect on, something that you should consider. So I don't want to be the bearer of bad news or the Debbie Downer who puts a dampener on your experience. You should have a good vacation. You should enjoy food culture. You should try different foods. But you should also be conscious of the fact that, where does the food come from? Who is growing it? Who is working? Who is getting paid to bring that food to you? What is the effect on the climate? What is the effect on, human populations? What is it like to be a farmer? What is it like to grow your own food? I like gardening, and I think you should also consider trying to grow something, just so you understand, that food has to come from somewhere. Somebody has to produce it, and we should have respect. We should be food conscious. We should reflect on where our food comes from and enjoy it, and show respect for the people who work hard to bring it to our table. That's all I want to say for today, and we'll talk more about food and move on to the next chapter in the following week, next week. Enjoy your holiday. Thanks for listening.